Hello, everybody. How's everybody doing? I got stuck with a little bit of yerba mate, and when it gets down into your throat, it makes you cough. I was just coughing a minute ago. Okay, just be aware. I got to clear my throat still. Anyways, today we're going to have a great day, hopefully. I try to educate, I try to have a good time here. And one of the issues I encourage people to do is to ask questions. If you have questions, be my guest. Please don't hold back. Don't feel sorry for me. Treat me as bad as you can. And I had a few questions the other days, and I'm just catching up on some of these questions. What I do is I go over some of the questions people make, and and then I go back and see if I can answer them. I bring them here real time to discuss them. And I had quite a few questions. I'm going to be dealing with some of those questions today. But before I can get to the questions, I have to set the stage, present the context. What is the context here? And the context is that we have a difference in the notions of what philosophy is. That's where it all starts. It starts that we don't all seem to have the same notion of what philosophy is. And so when I say philosophy and when I talk about Ayn Rand specifically, and I attack her, I dissect her, I have a different notion of what philosophy is. In fact, I'm saying that she was not a philosopher. And neither was anyone from Aristotle all the way to, I don't know, to Noam Chomsky. None of those people are philosophers. Okay? And so you might say, well, Bill, who are you to say what philosophy is, what philosophy ain't? It starts at the beginning. And the beginning is that, first of all, we can't just use a term in a given sense because we've used it like that for the last 2,500 years. If there is no rational definition of the word philosophy, then we cannot use that word. We have to redefine it or define it for the first time, really. That's what it is. Right now, we have different notions of what philosophy is, and everybody thinks they know. And it turns out that everybody's talking past each other. Everybody's talking about something different. One guy says it's about ontology, and they have this branch known as ontology. Another says, no, it's epistemology. Another guy says, no, it's political science. Another one says, no, it's ethics. Another one says, no, it's aesthetics. All of this is philosophy? What is philosophy? What is a philosopher? What does a philosopher do? And so if we are going to use the word philosophy rationally in a discussion, in a debate, we absolutely must define the term. I'm sorry. And if this breaks with tradition and I'm the only person on earth who holds this view, it doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. If we're going to talk sensibly, we have to define the term. We have to find out what philosophy is before we can talk about philosophy. And not everybody will agree because a lot of religions die with rigorous definitions. And that's why people don't like to change. They say, well, no, I'm not going to change that. This is what I learned in high school. This is what I learned in college. This is my experience with philosophy, and you're going to change all that right now? Well, if we're going to use the word philosophy consistently, rationally, in a debate, yes, I'm going to change all that. I'm going to do my utmost to change all that, okay? And so we should spend 2 years arguing about the word philosophy rather than applying the word in senseless manners and going around in circles and talking past each other because we're not on the same page. Okay, does that make sense? And not only am I defining philosophy, there's been a paradigm shift, and that's what this channel represents. Rational science. What is rational science? Why do we call it rational science rather than just science? Well, we want to distinguish it from what we've been doing for the last 2,000 years, which is known as science. Really, that term came about right after the 17th century so-called scientific revolution. So it used to be called natural philosophy. Now we call it science, okay? But the point is that we say that's not science. What is science? I mean, here we lost our track because all these people are giving us irrational explanations for how the universe works. Space-time bends, time bends. That's gravity. Geometry, as they call it. Time has to do with geometry. Particle can be at two places at once, quantum mechanics. And I'm going to the extreme cases here, but just to make my point. The point is, we only have irrational explanations, and we have people like Richard Feynman and Leo Susskind, professor at Stanford, and they say, look, we don't understand these theories. We don't understand our own theories. We can't make sense of them. And so then we got a problem, because these people say, oh, we've proven the theory. We've proven quantum mechanics. We've proven general relativity. They've proven all this, but they tell you then that they don't understand their own theories. So we got a little bit of problem. We got a little contradiction there. Okay? We either understand and can explain, or we don't understand and we just admit it and say, look, we're ignorant. I mean, that's, I think, the way it should be, right? Anyways, I had to define not only what philosophy is, but also what physics is and what science is. So all these three terms have new meaning in this channel. Does this mean that you have to agree to these definitions? In science, we don't agree to definitions. In science, we get inside the ring and fight for our definitions and defend them with shield and sword, if they allow you in the ring with that, okay? We're in the Colosseum here, and it's you with your shield and, me with my sword and so on. You got to fight for your definitions. And you can't just say, well, this is what everybody else thinks. I don't care what everybody else thinks. Here we are on an island. It's you and me, buddy. So, there's no crowd out there, booing or cheering. Okay, you got to defend your own definition. That's the way we do it in science. And if you can show my definitions are inconsistent, then I can't use them consistently, rationally, scientifically, then you have a point. So that's where we start. We start at definitions. Okay, and so before I get to the questions that people asked and some of the comments people made, which I'm going to be addressing today. There's a long list there. I didn't think so many people were into this, but yeah, people are interested in these subjects. Okay. I got to go with Ayn Rand's definition of philosophy, because it's essentially the notion that everybody else has out there. So I think she's a perfect representative of what people think philosophy is, or what this notion that people have, this vague notion people have of what philosophy is. And what I'm saying is, again, if it's easy to show that Ayn Rand's notion, and I don't pick on, I'm picking on Ayn Rand, yes, but essentially I'm really, she is in particular, but in general I'm picking on philosophy, on what the notion of philosophy. I go into the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, and it's all garbage, all nonsense. Not a single word survives. You will not be able to go in there and pull out a definition. And not a single one. Listen to what I'm saying. It's not like you can get out there, at least the ones I've seen, maybe I haven't seen all of them, but I'm assuming they're all the same way. They tell you the history of these words. They tell you what these words have meant to different philosophers throughout the ages. They don't tell you, look, this is the definition of exist, period. No. And this is the definition of knowledge. No, you won't find that. You'll find a long article and what the philosophers have said about knowledge or exist or what an object is throughout history. That's what you'll find. So you end up, saying, well, what is an object? What does exist mean? What is knowledge? And you won't find it in any. I'm also picking on the Stanford Encyclopedia, but you won't find it in the Catholic Encyclopedia, the New Advent. You won't find it in the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy. You won't find it anywhere. You won't find it in the Wikipedia. You simply won't find definitions that you can sink your teeth into. So if we're going to talk rationally, consistently, scientifically here, we're going to have a debate, a discussion, a dissertation. We have to start by defining the crucial terms that make or break our arguments. Okay? That's what I try to do on this channel. Okay? And again, I'm not asking you to agree to my definitions. You don't agree with my definitions, get inside the ring and fight for your definitions. Okay? That's the way it works in science. You got to defend your definition, not say, well, this is what all the philosophers thought this word meant or whatever. Tradition will not save you. Okay? Okay, so let's go with Ayn Rand's definition of philosophy. That's, I think, a good starting point. Okay? And Mrs. Rand says, philosophy studies. Big problem there because you can study and not understand anything. Okay, I've covered that in the past. So studies is a bad word, but let's continue. Studies the fundamental nature of existence. Is that what philosophy studies? Existence? I thought physics was the study of existence, right? If you're going to explain something regarding something that exists, I think that falls under physics, not under philosophy. Okay, but let's continue. We'll get more and more deeper into that issue. Okay, nature of existence, of man's relationship to existence. Relationship to existence. I thought you define existence and then that's what exists if it meets the criteria of the definition. What is this nonsense about relationship to existence? Is she saying she's going to introduce an observer and make it subjective? What exists depends on man's relationship to existence? And again, I'll get deeper into this. It's just if you have something better to do, don't do it. Stick around and you'll learn something. In the realm of cognition, the special sciences are the trees, but philosophy is the soil which makes the forest possible. Very poetic and very nonsensical. What Ayn Rand is saying is that before you do any discipline, before you engage in any discipline whatsoever, chemistry, history, anything, you need philosophy. That's the soil on which everything is, all the trees are planted. And she kind of means by this that first you have to perceive, you have to be conscious, aware, you have to detect, you have to feel, you have to see, hear, maybe touch, smell, taste, right? All the senses. Okay? You got to smell God if you want God to exist. You got to taste Him. Okay? That sort of thing. Otherwise, He doesn't exist. I don't know about that. Is that how we determine that a magnetic field exists? By tasting it or smelling it? I don't know. And she says it's see, touch, but you can't see or touch a magnetic field. So we got a little bit of a problem with her notion that we're going to use the senses in some way related to existence. It sounds like she's going to be very subjective about what existence is. And in that sense, she's no different than all of the other so-called philosophers throughout history, including all the mathematical physicists throughout history. Everybody thought that you prove existence by touching or seeing. And if you can't touch it or see it, it doesn't exist. That's essentially where we are today. And that's why, rational science had to change all that and say, no, we have to stop this endless chatter, this endless circular chatter. We have to define these terms so if you want God to exist, define the term exist and you'll know whether God exists. If God meets the definition of exist, then He exists by definition. And if He doesn't, He doesn't. It's just that simple. We don't have to introduce the observer and say, well, can you detect God? Can you touch God? Can you see God? We don't have to get into any of that. We just say, does God meet the definition of exist? Right? If God does. He exists by definition, not because I believe or stop believing. Okay? Okay, so, Ayn Rand, I think, starts on the wrong foot already there. Okay? The Atlas Society, she wrote a book called Atlas. Ooh, let me get that light out of there. Um, yes, wrote a book called Atlas Shrugged, and then as a result of that, her followers created a society called the Atlas Society. Okay, and they pretty much are on the same boat. They put this for the word philosophy. Okay, this is on their website. So, philosophy is a comprehensive system of ideas about human nature and the nature of the reality we live in. So again, they introduce existence, reality. Reality and existence, by the way, are synonyms. So whenever we use the word reality, real, being, they all mean exist. If you look up those words, you'll find the word exist in the definition. When you look up exist, you find reality, being, living, you find synonyms. We don't know what the word exist means because no one has ever defined it. But everybody talks about the existence of God, the existence of space-time, the existence of zero-dimensional particles, the existence of black holes, and nobody tells you what the word exist means. And everybody said, well, I know what it means. We all know what exist means. Exist means exist. Reality, real, right? And so we're back to synonyms. No, we have to define the term. We have to define it very specifically so that we can use it consistently in a discussion, in a debate. I need to know what it means to you, and you need to know what it means to me. Then we can talk sensibly. Otherwise, we're just talking in circles. We're not on the same page. Okay. Okay. These folks continue. Nature and reality we live in. It is a guide for living. Nature of existence? What does that have to do with a guide for living? Are they talking about a recommendation, how you should behave, how you should live, maybe how you should vote? Are they talking about politics here? What is this? What is this? A guide for living. Is that philosophy? Is philosophy just a way of thinking, a recommendation on how you should live? See, these are the vague notions we have of philosophy today. Because the issues it addresses are basic and pervasive, determining the course we take in life. Again, recommendation on how you should live, how you should think, how you should behave in order to live in a civilized society. I guess that's what they're referring to. And how we treat other people. Is that what philosophy is? How we treat other people, how you should live, how you should think, in order for society to be maybe more productive or for the world to be a better place to live in? Is that what philosophy is about? These are recommendations. This is not philosophy. Because if that's philosophy, we are all philosophers. Everybody has a way of thinking. Everybody has a recommendation how the world should be. Everybody has his own opinion about that. So we're all philosophers. What does the word philosopher mean in that context? That's the vulgar notion that we have of philosophy, that everybody's just got his way of thinking. That's Joe's philosophy. That we can't use that notion in a discussion if we're going to talk about philosophy. And of course, that's a notion that the Atlas Society had, and also that Ayn Rand had. Okay? The topics that philosophy addresses fall into several distinct fields, and here you can see that they have totally different notions for what philosophy is. It's like philosophy is everything, and it's got all these branches. The first one is metaphysics. And what is metaphysics? The theory of reality, in other words, of existence. Well, that wouldn't be a problem, except it's got two. I have two objections against that. The first one is that existence, reality, the nature of what exists belongs to physics. That's the first problem. The second problem is that they always introduce epistemology together with metaphysics. How do we know what exists? That word know is introduced there. Knowledge. How do we know what exists? And for that, they immediately introduce the senses. Sight, touch. They don't usually include hearing, taste, and sound, taste, and smell. They don't include those usually because they say, well, you don't prove God by smelling God, but you got to see and touch Him. It's that notion that people have that what exists is what you can touch and see. and yet you can't see the air and you can't touch a square. And so the question is, what are we going to do with those? Do they exist or not? For that, you need to define the word exist. And even before that, the word object, what a thing is, okay? Anyways, that's religion, only because you introduce the observer, knowledge, consciousness, awareness, perception. That's why metaphysics is a religion, okay? I want to make sure that's clear. As soon as you introduce subjectivity, introduce an observer in any way, shape, or form with anything that exists, you are no longer talking about existence. And that has to do with the definition, which I'll go into in a second here. Epistemology, that's nonsense. Theories of knowledge, they haven't defined knowledge, but they have theories of knowledge, okay? How we know what we know usually. Ethics, what does ethics have to do with philosophy? Ethics is an opinion. Is it ethical to kill an animal? I mean, I kill animals every day. I kill flies, some bugs that crawl into my house because I have plants. So they come in, they do their thing, and sometimes, on the wall, and I kill them. So I'm a murderer. Is that ethical? Maybe I should, babysit them, just grab them and say, go fly, little bug, go out there. No, it's easier to get something, just whack them. So I'm a murderer, I'm an assassin. I kill animals every day, every so often, right? So is that ethical? Politics, is that part of philosophy? Don't we all have our proposal for how the world should be? So that's nonsense. That's really, politics is nonsense. That's why I got out of it. I finally learned my lesson. I don't do politics anymore. Just get out of it. If you're into politics, get out of it. It's religion. You'll never figure anything out. And I guess you just need, if you're still into politics, that means you still have some years ahead of you in which you got to figure it out, right? Aesthetics, art, that kind of thing, beauty, that's opinion. None of that has anything to do with philosophy. So these are not the branches of philosophy, okay? Especially if you're going to say that philosophy is a science, which is what Ayn Rand said in one of her statements. She said it's the science of, I covered that last week, okay? And no, if you're going to say that philosophy is a science, some people say the opposite. They say you have science and you have philosophy. Like one thing has nothing to do with the other. They're like alter egos, counterparts. And other people say, no, philosophy is a science or part of science. For those who say that it's part of science and use science in their definition of the word philosophy, they have to explain why it's a science. And for that, you need to define what science is to begin with before you get there. You have to start at the definition of science so that we understand what you're saying when you're saying that philosophy is a science. Okay? And none of these are sciences because none of this can be used rationally. A lot of this is just opinions or undefined terms like knowledge. So, none of this falls under the notion that we should have or the proper definition that we should have of philosophy. Okay? And so here's a list of what philosophy ain't. Okay? This is what philosophy is not. Philosophy cannot be a way of thinking because everybody has a way of thinking. It cannot be a belief or opinion. That's subjective. And philosophy is not supposed to be subjective if it is a science. If we're going to include it as a science, we're going to say that philosophy is a science. We cannot have belief or opinion. We got to remove the observer. Okay? Does it study existence? No, that's physics. Aesthetic, ethics, justice, consciousness, observation, recommendation, how you should live. None of that is philosophy. Okay? Are you happy? What makes you happy? No, we're not interested in all that in philosophy. Okay? So the question if none of this amounts to philosophy, what is philosophy in the alternative? That's where we have to start. Let's start at what it is instead of what it ain't. Okay? And here you have a little picture that I like to show. Okay? And we start by defining what science is. And we say science is the body of rational explanations. Okay? That's what science is. Science is rational explanation. Science is divided into two parts, physics and philosophy. What does physics do? Rational explanations of phenomena. Philosophy, rational explanations of behaviors. Okay? And so now we have it very well delineated. Physics deals with anything after you kill all living observers in the universe. Once you kill all observers, and there's no more interference by subjectivity, what remains behind is existence. And that's what physics is going to study. Physics is going to study the motion of objects, just objective mechanisms. Okay. Philosophy, on the other hand, studies behaviors, and of course, people say, "Well, that's subjective." No, not really, because a behavior, why someone did something, is not subjective. You're explaining my belief of that behavior is subjective, not the behavior itself, not the explanation of that behavior. People don't always understand that, and it takes a while for people to fall in and understand that concept. Where do we put Ayn Rand? Well, we put her under epistemology, with the senses. She talked about truth, fact, knowledge, proof, evidence, consciousness, sensations, perception, and other stuff that has nothing to do with philosophy, which is a science. All that has to do with religion, with opinions and belief. Ayn Rand essentially was she was a politician. She was into politics. She wanted to tell you how we should live. She was into against collectivism, communism. She was Russian originally. She came to the United States and railed against Stalin. She didn't like all that interference. She said, that man has free will, and therefore all she did was talk about how free will should be used. She gave this notion it should be used responsibly, okay? And I'll get into that later on, but the point is that Ayn Rand dedicated all her so-called philosophy, which is just her general way of thinking, and she applied it to politics. That's what she did. So she was not a philosopher. She was a religious person. Any person who uses their so-called philosophy to tell you how the world should be run, what the best form of government is, that's opinion. That's just opinion. And that's what politics does, and that's why politics is a branch of religion, not a branch of science. There's no such thing as political science. No, it's political religion. Okay, that's what it should be called. Okay, so I give you a general picture that the notion that we have of philosophy, this notion that philosophy is simply a way of thinking, that can't be used consistently in a debate, in a discussion, in a dissertation. Okay, so let's go with the comments some people made. Okay, let's see if we can cover all of them. Okay, here we go. Someone said, "Do you state that atoms exist?" Big word, exist. And do you state that atoms are objects? No, we don't state. See, this is the problem. People are still operating under the traditional notion of science. And of course, they have this notion of exist tied to that notion of science. And we're changing all that. There's a paradigm shift, and unless you understand that, you're not in tune with this, what this channel does. Okay, so let's answer that question. Here's the explanation. It says, in rational science, we do not state that God is an object or that an atom is an object. We do not believe that God is an object. Okay, we do not state that God exists, or we do not believe or disbelieve or wonder about the existence of God. In rational science, we define. Okay. And then everything follows from the definitions. We know exactly what the word means. In this case, we say, okay, how do we define the word object? Object is that which has shape. So if an atom, whether God, whether space-time, whether a particle, whatever, has shape, then it's an object by definition. What do we mean by exist? Well, exist means physical presence. It's an object that has location. Location versus all the other objects in the universe. So if there's distance between God's chest and mine, well, God exists by definition. Otherwise, God does not exist by definition. Not because I believe or disbelieve, okay? And God can never be a theory. God can only be an assumption, okay? To say that God is a theory, an explanation, is like saying a chair is an explanation. Now, is a chair an explanation? No, we use a chair to explain. A chair is an object, not an explanation. And God cannot be in the same way an explanation. God is an object that we use to explain something else. So you can say, look, let us assume God exists. Okay, fine. And now, God, what is God? Well, God is a guy with a big white beard and a magic wand in his hand, and he waves it and he creates things. He creates the universe. Fine. Now we can follow the guy's presentation. Whether you believe that or not, that's your personal problem. Okay, that's your personal religion. But God cannot be an explanation per se himself. And God can only be an assumption, an object. We can use God to explain something else. And atheists don't understand that. They go around with the issue of belief, okay, knowledge, okay, perception, and that's a big problem. And by the way, I used to be an atheist for 20, 30 years more. Years of my life. I came from a militant atheist background, so it took a while to figure it out and get out of atheism. And today, I do not favor atheism, I attack them. I want to make sure people understand that atheism is a religion. It's a religion because the person talks about belief, disbelief, or lack of belief, and all this nonsense that they go around in circles with. No. In science, we say, let us assume that God exists. Okay, that's the scientific way of presenting God. And you can present God, you can even present leprechauns, you can present unicorns, you can present anything. You can say, let us assume that a unicorn exists. Now I can explain how that hole in the wall was made. The unicorn rammed it. Okay, that's how the hole was made. So I explained objectively how that hole was made. Now, whether you accept my assumptions, that's a separate issue. And whether you believe my theory, that's also your personal business. I don't care. So that's how we're going to present science here, okay? You just need to understand. So yeah, if God wants to exist, all he's got to do is have a physical presence, okay? He's got to be an object, first of all. Okay, in this case, we see a human-like figure. So obviously that God, right? That God is an object. Does he have distance? Well, he has distance with respect to the tree, the rock, the table, the human. Okay? So God exists by definition, not because I believe or disbelieve or lack of belief. Okay? Which is what atheists say. Okay? Agnostics say it even worse. They say they don't know whether God exists or not because they can't imagine an experiment that you can run to prove God, which is the notion that we inherited from the 17th century scientific revolution, so-called scientific. Okay, so this is my version of exist. Let's look at Ayn Rand's notion of exist. Okay, here's Ayn. Some call her Ayn Rand. Existence exists. Well, that's very poetic and also very nonsensical. To say that reality is reality, to say that reality exists or that existence is reality, all you're doing is just putting synonyms. Very poetic. Maybe you can use it in a song, but you can't use that as a definition. That statement implies two corollary axioms. And the first one is murder, absolute murder. Something exists which one perceives. Absolutely not. That's the notion that everybody has in their mind, that something that exists is what you can perceive. Perceive with what? With the senses. Okay? So the question is, can you perceive a magnetic field, around a magnet? And you can say, well, yeah, see, look, I can attract another magnet, so there's something there. But that's only if you put it to the test. If you only have one magnet sitting on the table, can you tell me whether the magnetic field exists? And so, in other words, if you go out there in the field and you find a piece of lodestone, a little rock out there that is magnetized, can you tell me whether it's a magnet or not, whether it's lodestone or just an ordinary stone? And again, it's not perception that's going to tell us something about existence. It's going to be the definition of exist that's going to tell us something about existence. You got to define the term. And obviously, if Ayn Rand had this notion that existence is related to perception or is defined by perception, she had no clue whatsoever about existence, and that's her starting point for ontology. So it just gives you an idea. She's in the same boat as everybody else until rational science. Rational science changed all that. Paradigm shift at the turn of the century. Now we have a new definition, a definition we can use consistently, and that obviously, offends a lot of people because there's a lot of followers of Ayn Rand. Says, she's so smart, and look, she had all these ideas about politics and about behavior and about ethics and so on, and of course about ontology, about what exists. And she made the same error as all the other philosophers. They never were able to define the word exist precisely. They had these vague notions, which they muddled further by introducing the observer. And everybody says, well, see, she says that what exists is independent of thought. But then in the next line and the next sentence, after the and, she puts perception. And she says, exists is what you perceive. No. Kill the observer. Exist belongs strictly to physics, and you can only talk about existence after you kill all living entities in the universe. Everything becomes inert. Now you can talk about what exists independent of thought, senses, or perception, or any of that. That's the only way you can deal with the word exist. Exist does not require an observer. Exist is when the observer dies, that's what exists, what remains behind. And atheists especially have lots of problem with that. They get offended by that type of reasoning because they're in the same boat as Ayn Rand, who was an atheist, okay? And all the other philosophers, take David Hume, take Immanuel Kant. All these people were really atheists deep in their, they didn't have this notion of the existence of God that the Catholic Church has. They were more advanced, a little more advanced than that, but they had this mumble jumble in their head where they didn't really know what exist meant. And no one defined the word precisely, and that's why we still have discussion between atheists and deists and theists and agnostics. They go around in circles. Why? Because no one defined the word exist. That's why we're still running around in circles. Rational science wants to stop all that. Okay, so we get to the scientific method. We need to know, where we put God. And God, again, cannot be a theory. God can only fall within that first step, hypothesis, the assumptions. God can only be an assumption. God is an object because he's got shape, right? I mean, if you're going to present God as a human-like figure, then God is an object. God has shape. If you present God as a concept and say, well, God is love, God is intelligence, then God does not exist by definition because only objects may be said to exist. Okay? And let me move on. I always get enthusiastic about these things and leave certain subjects behind. Okay? Let's put this back up here so we have it in the right context. Rational scientific method, this is the method we're going to use. And what are we going to do with this method? We're going to explain, okay? In this case, it's applied to physics, right? We're going to explain mechanisms, okay? And what is an explanation? The causes or reasons, in the case of philosophy, underlying a phenomenon. How? A mechanism of physics, or why? Purpose, reason, right? In philosophy, a consummated event happened. An explanation deals exclusively with the past. Science only deals with the past. You have to explain something that happened. ED at the end, happened. Listing of properties of a physical object, that's what a description is. And that's what mathematical physics does. They just describe. An equation is only a description, okay? So explanation and description are not the same. They're not synonyms. People think they are. Most people think they are. No, they're not. An explanation is not a description. Okay, you describe a chair. That's what you describe. And explain, you explain something that happened. Okay? So that's the distinction we're going to make in rational science. You need to explain how this universe works. You need to explain a mechanism, how Mother Nature does gravity. That's what you need to explain. You need to explain how a magnet attracts another from a distance. That's what you need to explain. Okay? Not to say, well, it attracts it at such and such speed, at such and such acceleration. This is the distance. Those are all descriptions. That's what mathematical physics does, and they have equated science with description. They say science is describing. No, science is explaining. You don't need any gray matter to describe. I look at a tree, yeah, it's green at the top, it's got this stem which is brown. That's not science. Measuring, it's 1 meter across, that's not science. That's you don't need any mental capacity to measure and to say, well, we measured the speed of light to be 300,000 kilometers per second. Is that science? Just measuring and saying this is the speed of light? No, that's not science. Science is explaining something. Tell me what light is and how it does its magic, like, the slit experiment. That's where you have to use your brain. You got to tell me how Mother Nature does her magic tricks. That's science, because that's where you have to burn some calories up there in the attic. Okay? But to say that, I measured and this is the perfect measure because I measured 10 times and the table measures 1 meter and 1 centimeter, that's science? No, measurement is not science. Equation is not science, okay? And not only do we explain, but we have to explain rationally. And here we have Miss Ayn Rand, what her notion of rationality is. She says, the virtue of rationality means the recognition and acceptance of reason. She uses the word reason to define rationality. These are essentially synonyms, okay? As one's only source of knowledge. What does knowledge have to do with rationality? Again, she had no clue whatsoever. It shows here that she has no clue. One's only judge of values and one's only guide to action. It means one's total commitment to the state of full conscious awareness. What does conscious awareness have to do with rationality? You can't define rationality in terms of consciousness, awareness, perception, knowledge, none of that. To the maintenance of a full mental focus. Mental focus is what rationality is about. A lot of people focus mentally, but whether they're rational, I don't know. In all choices, what does choices have to do with rationality? In all one's waking hours. Well, hopefully you do it while you're awake. Yeah, sure. It means a commitment to the fullest perception of reality. Perception of reality is rationality. I mean, some people, their reality is that God exists and God does all these funny things out there. That's their notion of, that's their perception. That's how they see the universe or the world around them. Are they rational because of that? Just because they perceive something or they come up with these ideas, these phantoms, these spirits? Okay? And again, she relates it to knowledge. Okay, so how do we contrast this? What is rationality under rational science? Okay, we have to define the word rational because we're going to say that we have rational science. What we do is define irrationality so that it's much easier and people can relate to that a lot better. And here it goes. This is the definition of rationality. These are the criteria. Treating a concept as an object, reification, concretization, that's irrational. When you say that love can move mountains, poetically, that's beautiful, but you can't introduce that into physics, for example. You can't say that love moved mountains. You can say a rock moved a mountain, maybe, but not that a love, a concept, okay? Using inconsistent definitions or undefined words, which is essentially all of the words that Ayn Rand defined are inconsistent. She tried to define words, but she wasn't very successful at it. The theory doesn't follow from the assumptions. The prosecutor presents a knife as exhibit 1, and then he tells the crowd, the jury, the person died of poisoning. Poisoning doesn't follow from the knife, that sort of thing. Okay, describing and claiming to have explained, which is what the mathematical physicists do all the time. They do a description. They say we've explained it. We've got a theory. They call their descriptions theories. and the mechanism proposed doesn't work or cannot even be imagined. For example, space-time, warpage of space-time. Maybe a better one is the fact that your twin brother is 50 years younger or 50 years older than you. Special relativity. Unimaginable. You two came out of the same womb and same day, maybe a few minutes between you, and he's 50 years older than you. That's what special relativity asks you to believe. Another mechanism, particle can be at two places at once. I mean, I like to get to these extreme examples so that maybe it shocks people into thinking. Maybe you snap out of it and say, well, yeah, that doesn't sound right. Of course it doesn't sound right. It's idiocy. It's period. I mean, the explanations that mathematical physics gives today, black holes, a zero-dimensional singularity that pulls stars around itself, twirls them, and forces them to orbit around this zero-dimensional, zero-volume, no-size nothingness, just because it has mass, infinite mass. Well, how does mass do it? Please explain. How does a concept move a star around itself? So we have all these problems and that people have trouble understanding because they get so used to reading about these things. Oh, black holes, they've been proven. Yeah, they exist. They're looking for another one now. And people don't ask these basic questions like, what is a black hole? A zero-dimensional singularity? And some people even say, no, that's not what mathematical physics says. Yes, it does. Chandrasekhar got his Nobel Prize for proving mathematically that a star that is much bigger than the sun collapses to zero-dimensional structure, no volume, no size. That's what he got a Nobel Prize for. So don't tell me that a black hole has structure. It crushes all matter out of existence. There is no length, width, and height. And this zero-dimensional nothingness twirls a star around itself. Please explain the mechanism. Put it on the board. I want to see how it does it. Show me the mechanism. Okay? And this is the issue. One of the visitors put this question, a series of issues, series of questions, and I want to address these. If I can get this right here, okay? Morality. It says, morality only applies to man because he is rational. Well, morality is subjective, and rational, as we just shown, has an objective definition or objective criteria. So morality has nothing to do with rationality, and the fact that man is rational doesn't make him moral. Okay? I think a lot of people would argue that Pol Pot, the leader of Cambodia, supposedly killed millions of Cambodians. He was probably a rational individual. Was he moral? A lot of people would disagree. Hitler, Stalin, George Bush. We can go with a list of tyrants and murderers throughout history. Okay, Nero, Caesar, Alexander the Great. I mean, were these people rational? Were these people moral? What is morality? Morality is your personal opinion. That's what morality is. Philosophy should establish method of reasoning. No, that's the job of science. I just showed the rational scientific method. That's a method, and that belongs to science. Philosophy and physics, which are two branches of science, must follow that method. But philosophy is not the one that establishes the method. Okay, and again, it's this notion that philosophy is everything. It's the soil, as Ayn Rand said. When we use that vulgar notion of philosophy, then philosophy is everything. It's just a way of thinking, and then we can say that you start at philosophy. No, we don't. Philosophy is a branch of science, and science has to have some foundations before we can define its branches. Okay, and again, science is explanations, rational explanation. Says she was doing philosophy for living. There's no such monster. Philosophy for living? No. Philosophy, if it's part of science, it's got to explain something because that's what science is under rational science. And if you have another notion, get into the ring and fight. Okay? Get your shield, get your sword. We're going to beat you up. Philosophy for living, that sounds like an opinion, like a recommendation. This is what you should do to be happy. This is what you should eat to be healthy. diets, recommendations, politics, all subjective. It's all religion. But I like the last one. How do you know there is gravity? Okay, let's answer that one because I think a lot of people have this same type of focus, the same type of question. Okay, so let's answer that one. Okay, the first one here. First, let's address the first issue here. Is knowledge. Let me get this right here. I got a new mouse, so it's a little harder to manipulate it. What does know have to do with philosophy? Again, you have to define philosophy. We're going to get into epistemology and introduce the word knowledge into philosophy. Does philosophy also include ethics, politics, and everything else? And if it is a science, like in the case of political science, what do we mean by science? How is it a science? In what way is it a science? What does science mean in that context? And if it's just a way of thinking, well, everybody's got a way of thinking. So, we're not answering the question by saying that, how do you know? In other words, what does this question have to do with in the context of philosophy? That's the first issue. But there's a more basic issue, and destroys this notion of, knowledge of gravity, okay? The first one is no has nothing to do with existence. It's at odds with existence because existence, as we defined it now, is, what is it? Physical presence. That's what it is. What is physical presence? It's an object that has location. Now, where do you see the word knowledge in there? Where is there a provision for knowledge? See, as soon as you introduce knowledge, as soon as you introduce epistemology, as soon as you introduce observers and perception and see, touch, and the other senses, you're making your notion of existence, like Ayn Rand did, you make it subjective. That's why you cannot introduce an observer. The way we figure out what exists, we kill all observers. We do it mafia style. We wipe out the witness. You have to kill everything alive in the universe. That what remains behind, that's what exists. That's the way we have to look at this. And yeah, when she says there is gravity, right? No, how do you know there is gravity? There is stands for exists. Okay, so that's what we're saying. The person should have said, how do you know that gravity exists? But it turns out that gravity is a concept. And so by the definition of exist, the objective, rational, scientific definition of exist, only objects may be said to exist. It is irrational to say, does gravity exist? Does a magnetic field exist? You can't say that in science. Not anymore. That's the old way. You're behind the times. You're thinking in terms of the old notions of existence. So, a lot of these things have to do with the new definitions that we have in this channel. Rational science. We have new definition. We have a new language. And until you understand that we have a new language, you're going to go out in circles because you're thinking of these terms in the vulgar notion, the ordinary speech, because they've never been defined. And you're bringing that ordinary speech, you're trying to introduce it into science and carry out a rational discussion using these undefined terms or misdefined terms or loosely defined terms. You can't do that. If you're going to talk sensibly, you're going to talk in a consistent way, you have to be rigorous with your definitions. We need to know what these words mean because they make or break your argument if, once they're defined rigorously, then we can follow your presentation and then you can figure out whether you're talking consistently or not. So you need to define these terms, and that's what no one has done. That's why rational science came in and started doing that. Here we have another person. Hopefully I can get through some of these. There's just too many questions that came up. And this person asked, your definition of truth falls apart when you think of the reasonably necessary. I like that, reasonably necessary. It's black or white, it's on or off. It's necessary, it's not, but reasonably necessary. It's a maybe, okay, fine. Concept, true or false, this dichotomic binary concept is a major tool of human intelligence during observation. Again, introducing observers, epistemology, knowledge, perception. You can't do that in objective science, especially when you apply it to physics, okay? Physics has to be objective. True, which is given, which applies And I asked, to what? I mean, is this the definition of true, which is given, which applies? False is which is not given, does not apply? According to whom? Again, it's all these subjective things that they want to turn into some kind of objective, like, oh, truth is objective, okay? And truth is true. I love that one. It shows that these people have no capacity to define things in scientific terms. They never learn to define terms scientifically in a way that you can use it consistently. And that's been the case with all of these so-called philosophers and mathematical physicists in the last 2,000 years. They don't know how to define terms. And they never cared about definitions because the mathematicians are doing, they're doing equations. So they don't care about qualitative issues. They've never taken the trouble because they say, well, physical interpretations, that's philosophy. They dismiss that as philosophy. It's your opinion. We don't care about that. We care about the equations because we can bet our money on this. And what are equations? They're just descriptions. That's all they are. Is that science? No, not according to rational science. Anyways, let's get to my version of truth and false. I hope you like this version, okay? If I can get it. Let's see if I can get it here. Where did I put it now? Ah, here it is. Okay, here's my version, okay? Truth is with Mother Nature, Father Universe, and God having their respective file cabinets. Okay, that's what truth is. So let's explain this. What do I mean by that? I mean the following. Something happened in a certain way, or it did not. Okay? Now, do we know how it happened? I'll give you for instance. I believe, and I know for a fact, that my wife cheated with my neighbor. I know it. Now, my wife, if she's in her sound mind, and my neighbor, they should know whether they had sex or not. I mean, this is a black or white issue for them. They know whether they were there. I mean, again, if they were in their sound mind, right? In my case, I can only believe. I wasn't there, so I have to believe. I don't know if they had sex. Okay? And Mother Nature is more, Father Universe or God, whoever you want, okay, has the same issue. They know for a fact what happened. Whatever happened, happened. Okay? They know exactly how something happened. We don't know. We can't consult them because they whisper different things in different ears. This guy believes in God, and he said, well, God told me this in my dream. The other guy said, no, he told me something else. So all we have are our opinions about what happened. But we have to distinguish what happened objectively from the belief of that. And here, let me give you a for instance here so that we can put it in the right context. If I can find it here, here it is. Okay, here's an example. Here we have Felix the cat. He's going to throw a magnet, horseshoe, yes, through the window. So you ask, well, how did the window break? Okay. Objectively, it broke the way we just saw it. It broke because a horseshoe went through the window. That's how it broke. I'm just regurgitating what I just saw. That's objective. The mechanism that you just saw is objective. My belief of it, when I tell someone, the way the window broke is a horseshoe went through there. And the guy said, well, I think it was a crowbar. Another guy might say, no, it was Johnny's baseball that went through the window. So everybody's got a different theory of how the window broke. Okay? But we have to distinguish the mechanism itself. Whether you use a baseball, a crowbar, or a horseshoe, we have to distinguish that objective mechanism from which one we're going to choose, which one we believe in. That's where subjectivity comes in. But Mother Nature, she knows exactly how the window broke. It turns out that the dog went through the window. That's how the window broke. The dog jumped through the window. Okay? Maybe Mother Nature knows that, but we don't. We speculate. We have all these theories of how the window broke, and this guy says baseball bat. The other guy says no, horseshoe, crowbar, whatever. So the mechanism is objective. Even if I explain it to someone and said, look, the window broke in this manner. This is what I believe I will say, right? Which is the wrong way to present it. You just have to explain how the window broke. And the window broke because a crowbar went in. So that explains how the window broke. Now, the fact that I believe that specific version, that's what's subjective. Okay? And Mother Nature does the same thing. She knows how something happened. We can only believe. We have all these theories of how Mother Nature runs gravity, how she runs a magnetic field and all that stuff. We only have beliefs, okay? And the theory itself is objective. If I say, the way Mother Nature does gravity, she has particles pushed down on someone, flattens him towards the earth. So the guy can't, when he jumps, the particles push him back down. That's my theory. But the fact that I believe that that's the way Mother Nature runs her shop, runs gravity, is different than the mechanism itself. The mechanism, particles pushing down, that's objective. I can make a movie and you say, do you understand my proposal? If you understand a proposal, that part is objective. Whether you believe that that's the way Mother Nature does her stuff, that's a separate issue. That's subjective. Mechanisms are always objective if you can put them on a screen, if you can illustrate it. But of course, people confuse that with a belief, with the fact that, well, this is how I think Mother Nature does her stuff. No, forget about that part. That part is subjective. The part that is not subjective is the mechanism you're watching on the screen of how something happened. Okay? And people don't always tune into those fine points of how the universe works, of how Mother Nature does her universe. No, everything is not subjective. Okay, and in fact, this person does say this. Says you could argue that still every statement is subjective. And again, we're not saying that the statements are subjective, not the mechanism that you're watching on the screen. That is objective. You don't have to believe it. If you do believe it or don't believe it, that's subjective. But the mechanism itself, that's not subjective. Okay? So everything is not subjective. And so this person ends up, I think it's a woman, so I'll just, these days you don't know, we have not only diversity, but we have people who put fake names, so we don't know. But came up with a feminine name, so I'll call her a her. Physics is done by a human, and a human is subjective. No, physics is not done by humans. And science is not subjective at all. That's the point. The point of this channel is that science is not subjective. It's objective. The mechanisms are going to be objective. You're going to look at the mechanism and you're going to understand it. That's it. There's no subjectivity up to that point. The subjectivity starts when you say, I believe. I like this theory. I choose this. That's when it becomes subjective. When you choose. Everybody's got subjectivity. Everybody's got a religion. Everybody's got an opinion. But the mechanism itself is objective. And for that, we need to get to the word objective. Okay? So let's get in there. Today, I don't think I'll be able to answer any questions. What I'll do is I'll look them up and then answer them probably next time. So here we have Mrs. Ayn Rand. And what does she say about objectivism? Because she says, the name I have chosen for my philosophy is objectivism. My philosophy is, in essence, is the concept of man as a heroic being. That's objective. Objectivism. With his own happiness. Happiness is objective. I can only relate to one of my professors at the university, who the first day, this was in economics, and he said, here we're going to define happiness as money. If you have money, you are happy. So that's how he defined happiness. And here, good old Ayn Rand says, happiness. Well, if you have money, then you're happy, I guess, according to that professor. Right? as the moral purpose of his life. Moral purpose? Moral is, again, subjective, with productive achievement as his noblest activity. That's her opinion. That she thinks that productive has something to do with objectivism. So the guy who's not productive, he's subjective, I guess. I don't know. And reason as his only absolute. And I put the comment there. In other words, my philosophy is my way of thinking. That's all Ayn Rand said. She said, this is my way of thinking. And therefore, maybe she should call it subjectivism, right, instead of objectivism. Because, again, there is no such thing as philosophy for living. These are recommendations, and recommendations have nothing to do with science. And they have, therefore, nothing to do with philosophy, if philosophy is a science, if we're going to make some use of philosophy. Otherwise, what's the purpose of philosophy? Do we say everybody's got a philosophy, everybody's got a way of thinking? We can't use that notion, that broad notion, that undefined or vague notion of philosophy. We have to define the word philosophy if we're going to have a debate or discussion on what philosophy is. Okay? And Ayn Rand also defined objectivity, okay? And here's her version, again, of what she thought about in terms of what objectivity meant to her, okay? Is both a metaphysical and an epistemological concept. Here we got a problem because, again, she once introduced knowledge. Epistemology has to do with knowledge, especially theories of knowledge. What does that have to do with objectivity? It pertains to the relationship of consciousness to existence. Oh my God, what does existence have to do with consciousness? Again, if you want to know what exists, kill the observer, kill consciousness. It's the other way around, okay? And then she continues, metaphysically, it is the recognition of the fact that reality exists. Again, that's very poetic, love it, but it's no good in science. It can't be used consistently. It's not rational. Okay, to say that reality exists. All she said is existence exists, or reality is real, or whatever. Any way you want to phrase that. That's not useful at all. Independent of any perceiver's consciousness. Okay, so if reality exists independent of any perceiver's consciousness, why does she immediately introduce consciousness in relation to existence? She starts by saying it's independent, which is correct. That would be, if she would have stopped there with a period, it would have been great. But she says, next she says, epistemologically, it is the recognition of the fact that a perceiver's consciousness must acquire knowledge of reality. So again, she keeps saying that existence in the end does depend on the perception, on the perceiver's notion, on his consciousness, on his awareness. And that's why she also believes that existence is related to knowledge. So on the one hand, she says it stands alone. What exists stands alone, which is correct. If she would have stopped there, that she would have had the notion, would have been at least in the ballpark. But as soon as she puts that and puts the perception, the senses, introduces the senses in there, then it means she didn't understand what existence meant. Because she's contradicting what she said originally, the first notion that she had, that existence is separate from perception. So this is the problem. And people say, no, she did say that, Bill. No, she didn't. She didn't because she put and after that. And as soon as she puts and, it means she didn't understand. And people don't have that ability to sense that difference. They think that, oh, she said it. She said a lot of things. It's like you cover every base. What is an object? An object is an entity. Okay, what is an entity? This is the word that Ayn Rand used. And she says, and I'll show that next week. We ran out of time here. She says, an entity is that which you can point to. That was great. If she would have stopped there. If she stopped there and says an entity is what you can point to, which is what? A shape, right? A shape. Then you can point to something that has shape, okay? You see a shape there, a form, you can point to it. You can't point to a concept. And then immediately after that, she introduces the observer. It says, well, you got to be able to perceive. You got to be able to see. You got to be able to touch, smell, taste, I guess, See, if she would have stopped, she would have had it. But she kept going, meaning she didn't understand. And people don't understand these nuances in definitions. When you continue, it's because you did not understand what an object is. And a lot of people have problems there because they immediately go into what exists. They equate entity with existence. And entity and existence are not synonyms. Entity is that which has shape. Existence is that which has shape, but in addition, it has distance with respect to the other objects in the universe, to all the other atoms. In other words, that which has location. So no, they're not synonyms. Anyways, I'm going to continue with this line of thought, and I hope I offended at least half of the people that came here today or that watched this video. And I'm going to keep offending you even worse next week, because I'm going to get in a little deeper into existence, and I want to destroy Ayn Rand's notion. It's not only her notion; it's the notion that all philosophers had in the last 2,000 years. I'm picking on Ayn Rand only because she's one of the modern philosophers who attempted to define these terms. Entity, exist, which belong to physics, not to philosophy, first of all. And second, she failed. She did not define why, because she covered every base. She covered more bases than she should have. If she would have only covered first base, it would have been great. But she covered second and third base, and she muddled it up and says, an object is all of this, and existence is all of this. When existence has to be, shortened, and an entity has to be shortened, you have to chop it off. You can't have all these notions of what an object is. You can't have all these notions of what existence means. And that's where I'm going to be attacking Ayn, and with her I'm attacking really all of what's been done in philosophy in the last 2,500 years. We have a new definition of philosophy, a new definition of physics, new definition of science, and also of a lot of the words that belong in these branches. And until you are tuned into those definitions, you want to understand first what this channel is about. Second, I'm not asking you to agree. If you disagree, that's very simple. Just get inside the ring and fight for your definition, defend your definition. And third, we're going to show that these definitions of what rational science has come up with can be used consistently, rationally, scientifically. And with that, I'll see you this Wednesday, same time, same station. We'll see you then. Bye-bye.